This morning I'm going to talk to you about the issue of global warming linked to the digital sector and the tool of the carbon footprint assessment. First, according to you, what is the share of the global greenhouse gas emission that digital sector is responsible for? The response is here. In 2019, the sector emitted 4% of the global greenhouse gas emission. If it were a country, it would be the fourth largest emitter carbon dioxide in the world, about 4 times more than in France. With the quick expansion of the digital sector and in particular the development of connected objects, artificial intelligence and video streaming, the study here anticipates that the carbon footprint of the digital technology could almost double by 2025. This increase in the carbon footprint and other environmental impacts is in part due to the growth of global data traffic on the world, will reach 25% per year today. However, this tendency is contrary to energy and resource supply. Even if the growth of the energy consumption stay under 1.5% a year, like in the sobriety scenario in the graph, it won't meet with the expectation of the Paris Agreement. As a reminder, the Paris Agreement has the objective to limit the global warming to plus 2 degrees Celsius compared to the industrial periods in the 2100. So the question is, digital technology from research to industrialization and uses could be sustainable within the meaning of global warming contribution? To answer this question, we propose for each step of the development the carbon footprint assessment. This tool allows to quantify greenhouse gas emission of an entity like factory, lab, laboratory, or campus. For the laboratory research, the CNRS Head of Direction, Antoine Petit, promotes the carbon footprint assessment at the lab level, even if they have, in fact, it is not compulsory for the lab. This is compulsory for the big institution like CNRS, INRAE, INSERM, but it's more relevant to make this carbon assessment at the lab level. Then the greenhouse gas emission are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, sulfur hexafluoride, hydrofluorocarbon, and perfluorocarbon. To assess the contribution of this greenhouse gas emission to the global warming, we have to quantify per gas its amount of emission and its individual global warming potential. The GWP, global warming potential, is the ratio between the energy returned to the ground in 100 years than 1 kilograms of gas, that which 1 kilograms of carbon dioxide will return. For example, 1 kilogram of methane will hit the atmosphere as much as 28 kilograms of carbon dioxide in the century following their emission. Indeed, in the paragraph, we can see that the carbon dioxide is in charge of almost 75% of the greenhouse gas emission in volume and in global warming potential. So we use it like the common unit. We spoke about tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Thanks to these tips, we will be able to add several gases without mixing them. However, how can we assess all the greenhouse gas emission in each product or service? For that, we use the methodology of life cycle analysis. The amount of greenhouse gas emission is quantified during the cycle life process of one good or one services, from raw material to the end of life. Yes, to the end of life. Then we can calculate the amount of greenhouse gas emission during the cycle life process. This amount is called emission factor. They are stored in the big Excel tool and updated by the association bilan carbone. I give you here in the table some emission factor of digital technology, like laptops, smartphone, or connected TV. And here, I give you an example of calculation. In the lab, we are going to collect all the activities data, conception, in yellow, and we multiply it by the emission factor, here in blue, that we found in the big Excel tool. And then we have the amount of the greenhouse gas emission linked to the activity. Then carbon footprint assessment has a question of scopes. Which emission are the laboratory responsible for and which are not? To answer this question, we delimit arbitrarily several scopes. First, we assess the greenhouse gas emission on 1 year. Then we assess on what we buy and what we use. If it's all we use, should we take into account the carbon footprint of the way of transport of all our collaborators, provider included, for example? To respond to this question, to answer this question, we have to make a common use scopes for the French legislation. It cuts out 3 scopes, the first 2 of which are mandatory for structure having to carry out the carbon footprint, scope 1 and scope 2. So the first scope corresponds to direct emission, like energy consumption, vehicle fleet, and so on. The scope 2 corresponds to indirect emission, like the use of energy and especially the consumption of electricity, or refrigerant gas leak, like in cooling system. And the third corresponds to the rest, purchase, fixed assets, waste, commuting, professional mobility, etc. Now, here are the big steps to realize the carbon footprint of the lab. First, the forming, then the activities data collecting with the carbon data analysis and the action plan. In each part, laboratory.
Just a note, you have a minute left. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Laetitia. In each part, laboratory staff and especially a teamwork are mobilized in order to make them aware of this issue and what they themselves determine the reduction action that they wish to carry out. It's why in the last part of the lab is mobilized to make the action plan themselves. To conclude, I want to show you an example of a carbon footprint. This is a l'Océan lab, an oceanography and climate laboratory. We observe that the major carbon footprint part is due to professional mobility, including the mobility by car, trains, and especially plane. This result corresponds to many of the lab, so it raises the question of the need of mobility for the individual and collective careers of researcher and the laboratory partnership and international influence. Overall, what sacrifice are researchers prepared to make, and how could the change in laboratory organization can facilitate this sacrifice so that there are not more? Thank you for your attention. And Safia, it's your turn.
Thank you, Marion. Perhaps if there is some question, please, you can use the chat so that afterward you can ask your question in the chat, and at the end of the session, we will ask the question, okay? So use the chat for the question, please, and after Safia talk, we will ask the question concerning the two talks. So now